Hey, what's up, guys? Today we're going to take a look at a really cool phenomena. It's very sensational, very exciting. It's a cool subject to talk about with your friends at the bar or wherever, and really get people talking about something intriguing. Okay, that's sleep paralysis. It's something that I think has become much, much more popular in recent years, and it also has different names, one of which is called the Old Hag. And we get that term from this book called The Terror That Comes in the Night, an experience-centered study of supernatural assault traditions by Dr. David J. Hufford. So I really dug into this book. I don't know if you can tell that this book is like completely riddled with all kinds of notes here. I'm using a new kind of synthesis study technique, which I'm only making better by the book that I finish. And I'll probably make a video at some point about that process. But for now, I'm going to take and give you all the information that I labored so hard to mine out of this incredible book. Because let's be honest, this is a kind of research-heavy book. It's a very... a lot of the stuff in here, it's not made for, leisurely reading. It's not completely titillating all the way through the whole thing. It's very dry, hard to get through. And if you're not familiar with some of the research terms and techniques that are used to, determine some of the claims that he makes, you're going to have kind of a difficult time. So my goal here is to try and give you a very accurate look at what sleep paralysis is, what is the Old Hag, which is what we'll talk about most of the time, and how a lot of the videos that I've seen online are actually getting things, way off base. They're completely missing the point of what it is. They may have only skimmed or read a little bit of Hufford's work, and for that reason, they're mixing different phenomena together. They're thinking that, the Old Hag is the same as sleep paralysis in a medical sense. They're thinking that the Old Hag or the sleep paralysis is the same as incubus or succubus. They're thinking it's the same as a nightmare, or they're the same as, a more vanilla demonic presence, influence, or visitation. Okay, and those are all different things, but they're all things that are getting muddled together in a lot of the videos that I've seen recently. Of course, one of the best videos that is available, and I'll put it in the description below, is a video interview with David J. Hufford. And so, of course, that's going to be excellent. He gives some really great tips and things in there that actually inform more on his personal disposition, his personal opinions, a little bit more of his theories and his guesswork about what's really happening surrounding sleep paralysis. And so those are really great. I highly recommend that you watch them. So let's just get right into it with, where does this story begin? So David J. Hufford is, I guess, a doctoral student. He may have already begun, but he moves him and his family to Newfoundland, Canada. And he continues his doctoral dissertation and studies there, where he works at the Newfoundland University in their folklore department, their history folklore department. And he goes deep into the catacombs of this folklore, division, and starts just reading viciously all of the documents that he can get his hands on, hoping to find something that will serve his needs for his dissertation and all that. And he ends up stumbling upon a kind of event that is called the Old Hag. Now, for those of you who don't know what sleep paralysis is or the Old Hag, let me just give you a description of what we're dealing with here. So basically, people are having this kind of weird experience where either when you go to bed or kind of waking up from sleep, you open your eyes and you see all around you, your room, assumedly if you went to bed in your room, you can see everything, but you can't move. You're utterly paralyzed. You can't move any part of your body for whatever reason. There are multiple reasons. And you have a terrible fear that is filling you completely. You can't feel like there's a reason, but there's a terrible fear in you. And then you may have like a feeling of a presence of some kind of like entity or evil entity or person, even though you may or may not see them. And you are also convinced that you're awake. This is not like a dream. Everyone is convinced that this is happening during a state of wakefulness. And that's basically the event. And of course, the most sensational part of all of this, but is not always present, is that there are sometimes like sleep paralysis demons, these different dark figured or humanoid entities that come into your vision or are a part of that sense of presence, and they come and haunt you or impose themselves on you or otherwise interact in your field of vision and serve as like, a kind of horrifying actor in the whole event. And so this event is basically the Old Hag. Now, that's the most basic vanilla way to describe this event, but it gives you kind of an idea about what he just read of in the catacombs. The catacombs, they're probably just like a basement of a university. And so he's very intrigued by this. Why is he intrigued? Well, because earlier that year, I believe, he had an event just like this, where he was paralyzed. He could not move. Only his eyes would open. He could look around, and he had this terrible fear, and there was an entity that came, and I believe, in his case, sat on his chest and tried to asphyxiate him, right? Which is one of the most common depictions that we can see here. Actually, that serves as the cover of the book, which is, this kind of sleep paralysis demon that is sitting upon this woman's chest. And I'll put the name of the artist of that famous painting on there too. And you feel like you can't breathe, like you're going to die. You're convinced that you're going to die. And it's just a really terrible experience. So he had this before. He read this account of it happening, a long time ago here in Newfoundland as a cultural tradition event. And he decides this is going to be a fantastic subject of study. And he assumes that it's only going to take him about 8 or so months to really complete his full studies. He'll use it for his dissertation, and then that'll be that. He can put it to rest. It's probably just going to be a one-off thing. Well, in fact, as you can tell, may or may not be able to tell by this 300-page book, that he spent 10 years studying this phenomena and conducted many, many interviews, both in Canada and eventually in America and other places in the world, to gather data on this phenomena. And so we got a lot to learn from David because of the decade of life that he sacrificed in pursuing knowledge around the Old Hag event. And one of the first interviews that he had with an older man, he first did all of his studies with students, as many people do, especially doctoral students who may or may not have access to a lot of grants or funding for their research projects. They start with university students, mostly because you can either force them to take your self-report study, your different questionnaires, or they're just more willing to do that because they're students. Why not? You have them in class. You make it an assignment. You have to fill out this questionnaire. And the results from the questionnaires that he gave to his students and the university students was promising. So he moved out. It seemed to be that there was a knowledge. Maybe half the people knew about it. Maybe half the people didn't know. They hadn't been exposed to it. And so he wanted to kind of get a sample in a larger population. So he moved out of the university into the larger public of Newfoundland, and he did an interview with this older gentleman who many years ago, I'm assuming that he was quite older, advanced in years, and this was a report that he was giving. And remember, this book was published in 1982, right? So copyright 1982. from University of Pennsylvania Press. And so when he did this interview, it may have been like, in the 70s, since this is the beginning of his research and all that. And so this older guy, this could have been, 50 years from that point. So this could have been quite a long time ago, in like the 20s or 30s. And this older gentleman gave a story about when him and his friend were out at this party or this pub or whatever, at this kind of party event, and they were talking with what he referred to as a woman of the night. So this loose woman, was known for her misdeeds with men and whatnot, was actually being a little prudish this night and did not want to kiss his buddy. And so because of that, his buddy, threw a big baby fit about it. And as, she was made uncomfortable and offended, she began leaving the party. And before she left, he called out to her, yelling and cursing her, saying that he was going to hag her or otherwise invoke the hag upon her. And it seems like she didn't really understand what that meant and didn't care. And so she just left, not thinking much about it. And then it was later found out that night she had some terrible, horrifying event that caused her to have this big freak out, and the whole town knew about it. Well, how did that happen? Was he able to invoke the hag? What does that even mean? Supposedly, in the Newfoundland tradition, it is possible to hag someone by doing things like stabbing a knife into a wooden plank or reciting the Lord's Prayer backwards and swapping out Lord and God with Satan, right? And doing, maybe something with chicken's blood. These various different witching techniques, different occult, dark magic, voodoo type stuff, and then that would invoke the hag. And apparently the people who knew about this tradition were fairly confident and just took it for granted that it was totally reliable, this hagging, this kind of witching event, invoking sleep paralysis upon another person. And according to the report, it did happen to that girl. So this is kind of a unique element that is present mostly just in Newfoundland, Canada, where, it's an island. If you guys don't know about Newfoundland that much, I would recommend that you go and watch. I'll even put it in the description. There's a little micro documentary that journalist Rex Murphy, rest in peace, and Jordan B. Peterson did on Newfoundland. It's a wonderful little island community. It's a fishing and kind of what is it called? A shore place. I don't know what that's called. A coastal city, a coastal island. And so they have a lot of ships coming in for import, export. They have a lot of fishing going on. And so there's lots of sailors, and sailors have a lot of different superstitions, which are, characteristic for them. And all the general stuff like black cats, having women aboard a ship, things of this nature. And this kind of nooks itself in with all of that other sailor-esque, fishing community, superstition, magical thinking, right? And remember, Hufford is not a big fan of any of those kinds of terms. He does not like superstition. He doesn't like magical thinking as, terms that we just throw around very easily, because he thinks that within the context he's approaching the old hag, it kind of confuses the reader. It confuses people about, is it just a superstition? Because it infers, if you're saying a superstition, then that means that it's inferring that the person who's talking about this kind of extraordinary event is wrong, unreasonable, and it imposes a kind of implicit materialistic reduction, and or a hyper spiritualization. He doesn't want to do either one of those. That's going to be the whole trend through this whole book, and why David J. Hufford really succeeded in giving such a high scholarly treatment to this phenomena because he does not want to make an argument either or. He's not going to say that this is a spiritual event where demons are visiting you, or that this is not a spiritual event. This is not anything that cannot be just materially reduced to some kind of phenomena, right? And he gets into that a little bit with some of the superstitions that are mentioned about, let's say, mermaids. Mermaids was a good one that he used, wherein there were very old cultural traditions, even in Newfoundland, with the sailors surrounding mermen, I think they were. I don't know that they were mermaids. That they could be seen from the decks of ships, and you could see them perched on rocks and such things during certain stormy conditions. And this was a regular occurrence for hundreds of years. And we have, very old, antiquitous, is that a word? Reports about these sailors seeing the mermen. But then, after a certain number of years, these reports stop happening, which just so happened to coincide with significant changes in the engineering and design of the ships, right? They become larger. Their decks are positioned in a much different place in relationship to the waterline. And so these reports go away. What does this have to do with it? Well, scientists went in and conducted studies with this kind of hunch that the ships were the key to it, along with different barometric pressures and the weather conditions and the water splashing out of rocks and things. Well, it turned out that they could actually, through the harsh manipulation of the environment, if they had an older style ship with a deck at usual height for those years that the reports came in, and that you stood on the deck at that place that you would be able to see, the waters and the rocks, and that there were very specific barometric pressures in the atmosphere and whatnot, then the mermen would appear quite regularly, and you could actually make out what seemed to be figures of men standing on rocks and in the waters and whatnot. So through scientific observational study and the strict manipulation of environmental factors, they were able to pretty much determine that the mermen were not real, right? Whatever that means. We may talk about that. They weren't material in the way that we think of as the people that we interact with as being material, right? They weren't actual magical beings or fishmen or anything like that. They were actually just visual illusions. They were caused by many different, very specific environmental factors. Okay. So just because we can explain these things through material means does not mean that we can remove the meaning of their occurrences, right? So this will be a claim that I make and not Hufford, which is that just because something happens and is explicable via scientific measurements does not mean that that negates the possibility of spiritual influence or spiritual reality or realms or entities. And on the contrary, these kinds of unique and unusual material events, convincing others of some kind of paranormal or supernatural, extraordinary spiritual experience, is that which imbues it with more meaning than it would otherwise. What do I mean by this? Well, take, for example, the parting of the Red Sea, right? We do a lot of research and study about the Red Sea. We find out eventually that, there's some kind of rare weather anomaly that every 1,000 years, there's a great storm that occurs and the winds that are there happen just perfect to split the Red Sea in the same way that it would have needed to split in the story of Exodus in the Bible. And when we find this out, then, of course, all of the atheist folk are going to say, aha, we got you. You are no longer able to claim God because we know now the explicable circumstances. Well, no, okay. Shut up. That's not true. Why? Because the Red Sea parted precisely when it needed to split. No sooner, no later. And just because that there is a material explanation for the event does not negate its meaning or its significance in relationship to the humans who experienced it, right? If you want to know more about that kind of take on things, because that's kind of how I'm going to be looking through, that's the lens I'm going to use to interpret much of Hufford's findings, okay? So I won't be as unbiased. I won't be as, I'll be more partial in that regard. But if you want to know more about it, there are excellent resources that I'll put in there from Jonathan Pageau, an Eastern Orthodox icon carver. And he has a great video in which he interprets the event that Tucker Carlson had, in which he reports being visited by a demon and having like these big scratch marks all over him, right? And the explanation that he gives is much in line with what I just explained about the parting of the Red Sea. So if you want more on that, Pageau's the guy to go to. So there may be material explanations for it, but that's not going to negate the possibility of spiritual reality. Okay? So we just have to keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, as he intends to do more of these studies and these interviews with people, he wants to determine whether he can establish a strict pattern in which these events are occurring so that he can determine whether this is a real event or not. And he wants to try and separate it out from all of the other very similar and related events that we might mistake it for, right? And that process is going to look like identifying very specific criteria, in our case, primary and secondary criteria, and then that will allow us to differentiate between the Old Hag / sleep paralysis and things like nightmares, incubus, succubus, and demonic possession or whatever. So that's the first thing we need to do, and that's what's really going to set right a lot of the different videos on here that on YouTube that have not done justice to the criteria that Hufford has established. They're very important, okay? So we're going to jump into that right now. This is one of the most important parts of the whole book, okay? So let me see. I got a little pink sticky note somewhere here. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. The following outline summarizes the initial findings concerning the nature and frequency of the experience. So, the description, primary features, these are definitive, okay? So the first one is going to be a subjective impression of wakefulness. So like I said, you are convinced that you are awake. This is not something that's happening in a dreamscape, okay? There may be room at times for it to be kind of like half in, half out, okay? And we'll get into that whenever we get into the sleep cycles, okay? Because the sleep cycles are going to be kind of important for us in some of the mechanics and the neurochemical portion of this whole phenomena. Okay, so impression of wakefulness, you're convinced that you're awake. Number 2, immobility, variously perceived paralysis, restraint, or fear of moving. Okay, so you can't move your body. You absolutely cannot move it. And you cannot move it for various reasons. Okay, when people are reporting that they are having this bodily paralysis, they'll sometimes say, I couldn't move because I was so scared. I was so scared I couldn't move. I was too scared to move. Other people will say, well, I just didn't even think of moving. It wasn't a thought that even occurred to me. I didn't think I could, or that it wasn't even something that I could do. Or maybe like a mix between all of that with like the presence of an entity. They will be so scared, but they'll be scared that the entity is going to kill them or otherwise pursue and harm them if they move, okay? Oh, and the other one was like physical restraint. You're convinced that the entity or whatever is physically restraining you in such a way that you can't actually move. The pressure is too great. It's holding you down, and so you can't move. It's all kind of explanations, explanations as to why you can't move. Now, one of the main medical claims that we can mention here with this second primary feature of bodily paralysis is going to be the fact that there, I guess, is a neurochemical aspect to this, which, there's a neurochemical that gets released in your brain, and if you have enough of it, then you will be paralyzed and you can't move, which is good because if you're dreaming, you don't want to be moving. You don't want to be acting out your dreams. So this neurochemical, and I'll put it on the screen because I forget its name, is keeping you from moving and acting out your dreams. People who don't have enough of this are going to sleepwalk. They're sleepwalkers, and they get up and they act out their dreams, okay? And so there's some kind of odd situation here in which either the chemical is not being uptake enough, it's not being absorbed enough, or it's not being generated enough. There's some odd amount of it in which your eyelids can open and your eyes can move bodily, but nothing else can move. So it's worth mentioning just as an aside. We'll get more into that aspect of it in a little bit. Okay, so second one, immobility, paralysis, thus the sleep paralysis, right? It's an easy one. Okay, number 3, realistic perception of actual environment. Okay, so when you open your eyes and you're having this experience, you don't perceive like, like Super Mario's castle or your grandmother's home that burnt down 5 years ago. Okay, no, you are in the place that you went to sleep. You perceive the thing that you perceived before, and you perceive the thing during the thing that you will perceive after. Okay, so you look around, and if you went to sleep in your room, you open your eyes, you're in the sleep paralysis event, you're suffering the old hag, and you see your room, just as it always is. Now, there are exceptions to this part of things, because occasionally the rules get kind of bent out of shape. And this is what to me is one of the most interesting parts of the old hag, is that there are sometimes reports that are either like outside of body, so they're kind of outside of themselves looking back on their own body. Sometimes they can perceive the entity, and part of the perceiving of the entity is that they can see, I guess, or they can perceive in some manner the entity down the hall, but the way that they report it is as if they are seeing the entity coming to them through multiple halls away, but they are still in the bed. Okay, so there's some interesting little breaks in reality, breaks in, I don't even know, in the way that things work physically and mechanically. So that's a little bizarre. And some of those aspects are actually going to be relative to Hufford's later work in near-death experiences and just before death experiences. And so hopefully he'll be able to do some research on that. He's technically retired now, but at least it's 5 years ago or so, he was saying that he wanted to continue doing research on death and dying and some of the odd reports and experiences that are associated with that. So hopefully he ends up doing that, and if not, we can pick up where he left off and continue. Okay, number 3 was realistic perception of actual environment. Okay, number 4, fear. Okay, we mentioned it a little bit with the paralysis, that sometimes the fear can be the thing that you think is paralyzing you. And 4 is just total fear. It's something that is present almost every single time. Now, it's like a very small fraction of reports in which the people experiencing this event of the old hag have all of the primary features and secondary features, but they have a positive experience and fear is absent. So for most of our purposes, we can just say that it's safe to say that if you have all 4 of these primary features. You're convinced you're awake. You can't move your body. You're seeing your actual environment, and you're fearful. That's the Hag episode right there. Okay. Now, these secondary features are things that were reported more than once and were very common in the research that Hufford did. And arguably, they're like the most interesting aspects of them all. So like the top 4 descriptions are like kind of basic almost. And people don't always associate that with what they think sleep paralysis is, because sleep paralysis is usually like you wake up, you can't move, and there's a sleep demon. But you can see how it's useful for us to use these descriptions that Hufford had given us to really get a better key on what this phenomena is. Okay, so let's go into the secondary features of the Old Hag. And again, these are almost always reported. They're very commonly reported, and most of the time people report more than one, but they're always at least one of the secondary features is present if the previous 4 were met. So if the previous 4 features were met, then at least one of the secondary features will also be present. Okay, and that's just, I think, a statistical observation. That's what the data says. Okay, so here is a very common one. Okay, number 1 of the secondary features, supine sleeping position. In other words, you're sleeping on your back. Really, almost always, these events are going to occur when the person is sleeping on their back. And it's even, so reliable that there seems to be some kind of, it's tempting to say that there is a causal link between supine sleeping and the event of the Old Hag. But I would say that Hufford's literature here insists that it is not a causal link. But medical professionals, and I've seen a lot of videos and stuff on YouTube that doctors have tried to address the sleep hag by telling people not to sleep on their back, and then they won't have sleep paralysis. I think that's worked for a lot of people. I myself, I have experienced sleep paralysis many times before. I actually have a very long history of sleep paralysis starting in my early childhood, and it continues even today, although I have not had an episode in multiple months, which is kind of how it works for me. I'll have like one every 5 or 6 months or so. And I'm actually going to put a link up here if you want, and in the description of another video in which I share my experience of my sleep paralysis, and I'll just do a story, just me telling my sleep paralysis stories, all of them that I can remember, and hopefully you'll find that interesting in a really dark way, because I have quite a few, and they are intriguing because they sometimes break from a lot of these different rules, and we'll see how that can happen with others as well. So sleeping on your back is one of the regular signs of this kind of event. I don't think it causes it, but it's highly associated with it. And if you don't sleep on your back, then you can avoid it. I will say again, I have had sleep paralysis. I think one of the very first sleep paralysis events I ever had as a child was on my side. And so do with that what you will, right? But almost always people are on their back. 2, the feeling of presence. This is also very common. They perceive through some kind of like sixth sense, right? And this is, I think he specifies that this feeling of presence is not through any kind of like material sensory input. So we're not seeing it, hearing it, smelling it, feeling it. We're not, none of our sensories are giving us data that tell us that there is something or someone present. It's some other kind of, it's just a feeling of presence. And that a lot of times is like associated with the fear, with the impending doom, with the convincing feeling that you're going to die, that there is something in the room with you, that there is someone coming to get you, whatever it is, or that it's its very being is emanating like all around you. There's lots of different reports about what the feeling of presence is, but that is the secondary feature, feeling of presence. Number 3, the feeling of pressure, usually on the chest. Okay, so this is like one of the really typical ones because, as we looked through with the book cover and all, and the sleep paralysis demon perched on top of the lady's chest, there's a lot of times people have reported feelings that there is, somebody crushing them, crushing their breath. They can't even breathe. Now, this is where we get a little bit of an interesting thing going, because there are some people who report these sleep paralysis events, and it's going to kind of mix with UFOs and alien sightings, which is another topic that we will do soon. We're going to go through, what is it called? We're going to go through Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose. And it kind of overlaps a little bit with some of this content, and that's why we'll do it. I know other people have made videos on this, but I think that overlapping it and cross-referencing it with this sleep paralysis event is going to be interesting. But some people have reported that they have seen aliens, that they abduct them or whatnot, and some will report a demon being on their chest, asphyxiating them, choking them, crushing their chest to where they can't breathe or take a breath in, or some people will say it's an alien. So this has kind of started a bit of like a cultural conversation, and a lot of the, I have these conversations with a lot of people because it's so sensational. It's such a fun conversation to have with people. And I think literally 1/4 of all people have experienced sleep paralysis, one way or another. And especially, I would say over 1/4 have either experienced it or they know someone who has experienced it. And so people love to talk about it if you can bring it up. It used to be a kind of like cultural taboo, a faux pas to bring it up. People would experience it and literally not tell people for 30 years until someone like Hufford comes along and starts asking you odd questions about this terrifying thing that happened to you long ago. But now that it's so popular culturally, it's like a pop phenomena almost. Several years ago, this became a kind of cool thing to talk about. People are way more open about it. And that was kind of the thing that gave Hufford his foothold in Newfoundland to begin with, because the people there didn't have such a staunch taboo against it, but rather were open to sharing these kinds of things together. And that's particularly the case in like a lot of different populations, which Hufford has shown interest in studying, like veterans and PTSD and different things like that. Aliens crushing the chest. There's some kind of like feeling that you can't breathe. And that, I think, is probably linked up as well with the feeling that you might die or the fear or whatever. But it's interesting that a lot of the times that the cause of the lack of breath is perceived to be some creature sitting on the chest, which is really bizarre. I mean, it's one of the weirdest parts of this whole thing is that people regularly, highly regularly, when they have this event, have some kind of creature upon their chest suffocating them. So I think that's pretty interesting. Now, so number 3 was feeling of pressure, usually on the chest. Okay, number 4, that is numinous quality. And the numinous quality kind of has a hard name to remember what that even means. But it's basically just the tendency for people to have this experience and then attribute it to something supernatural, spiritual, magical, haunting, ghostly, ghastly, whatever. All of these different like other-realmly feelings, right? That they attribute it to like a demon, an alien, that kind of thing. Numinous quality. Number 5 is a fear of death, We've mentioned it several times, but people are convinced as a secondary, a reliable, common secondary feature is a fear of death. You're convinced you're going to die, that what's going to happen with the, difficulty to breathe, you can't move, the presence of some kind of terrible entity, the numinous quality of feeling like there's some kind of demon or alien imposing itself on you, is that you're going to die. So it's a very uncomfortable feeling, not one that people would associate with, a good time. So that's kind of, the fifth one, the fear of death, is kind of like wrapping it all up in a way to try and convey to people who've never experienced this or heard of it. That's ultimately like the vibes that you're going to get from this whole experience. It's not fun. Okay, so here's some fun factoids about these events, right? So frequency and distribution of all of this. So overall, in the sample that he looked at, 23% of people were experiencing it. Differences in sex were not significant. So there's no significant difference in how males and females experience this event in frequency or distribution, either way. Okay. Pattern of recurrence. Okay, so these are important too. These are kind of cool. All right. These are the usual patterns that people are going to experience them. Either you experience the event once and it never happens again. Okay. Or you experience it once and then it starts happening at a very high frequency for like a week or two, and then it stops. And it may never happen again, right? So you'll have it at one night, then you'll have it the next night, then you'll have it the next night, then you'll have it the next night. And there have even been people that have had such high frequency in small clusters in which they go to bed, they experience the event, they awaken, and then immediately going back to bed, they experience it again. How unfortunate and terrifying, right? Praise God, I've not had that terrible frequency happen to me before, because that would be terrifying. Or you could have it like me, in which there are frequent chronic attacks, but over long periods of time. So you'll have it like once every 3 months, once every 6 months, so forth and so on. Right? So those are the most common frequencies and patterns of distribution in which people experience the old hag. And once you're having one or more events in a week, those are referred to by Hufford as runs. So that's about it. These are the primary and secondary features. There are several more, which I think we might get into as we continue. But that's like how we get into the phenomenological criteria, how we define the old hag and sleep paralysis, so that we can differentiate it from other events. And that was kind of like one of the biggest bones that I had to pick with a lot of the material out there, right? And so, there are different events. What is succubus? What is incubus? It's like whenever, some kind of demon thing comes to you and has sex with you in the night. A nightmare, is of course occurring in a dream world during sleep. Okay. And so that's kind of that's another, I guess, criteria that we'll introduce here. There are different ways to explain away this phenomena, right? And just like everybody wanted to explain away the merman that people were seeing, or when people see the Loch Ness monster in the lakes, or whatever kind of weird thing that's based on some kind of perceptual visual experience, they'll just say that the person is unreliable, that they were under a lot of stress, they were sleep fatigued, whatever, and because of that they were seeing things they weren't actually seeing. Their imagination had their way with them, whatever. And although that is totally possible, and I'm sure happens frequently, people see things that they didn't actually see, they just make assumptions due to all the reasons I stated. That is not sufficient to explain away the old hag. And for obvious reasons. One, that there is just a undeniable pattern of events that have occurred coming from reports from reliable individuals who have no reason to lie about it, and for a lot of reasons didn't even tell anybody for decades in some instances, right? So, why are we going to try and explain this away? So we can explain it away through some kind of like psychological means. If you guys are familiar with some psychoanalytical literature, Freud, Jung, Theodore Reich, they're going to make claims, and I forget the psychoanalyst name here. Let me see if I have... Oh, here's some definitions of nightmare. Oh, these are cool. Okay, so let's go into nightmare a little bit. So, oh yeah, you guys might like this. Okay, so nightmare finds its origin in the Anglo-Saxon word nichtmora. I don't know if that's how you say that properly, but it looks like nichtmora. If you guys know how to properly pronounce that, go ahead and tell me. So nicht means night, or I'm assuming darkness, and mora means incubus or succubus, which, as we said earlier, is like some kind of like demon entity that comes and like has some kind of sexual intercourse with you forcibly at night. And so there is a suffix that's used in mora, right? The A at the end of mora is a suffix that indicates agency or an agent, right? And meran is a verb form mara for crusher. Oh gosh. Okay, so that literally, so nichtmara, it basically literally means night crusher, the night crusher. Okay, so thus a nightmare has always included one of the most prominent secondary elements, right, which is the crushing of the chest by some kind of entity. As the Old Hag, when is a crushing of the chest at night? Yeah, is a crushing, yeah. So nichtmora, which is where we get our the Anglo-Saxon version of our nightmare, is, essentially an ancient version of like the night crusher, the person who comes and crushes your chest and suffocates you. So we have a lot of early evidence of this cultural event. So if we needed more support for the pattern and the pattern of these events occurring into antiquity, we have them, most certainly. But we don't want to just explain these away as some kind of like superstition or some kind of misapprehension, overactive imagination, or magical thinking, or any kind of like mental illness. What is another word for it? Not an illusion, but some kind of visual distortion, right? And there are going to be people here, which if I could ever find maybe I check the index, I'll have a lot better luck here. Psychological disinterpretation, 115. Okay, good. This is all stuff that we need here. So, okay. So we have various things that we want to try and explain these events away with. Why? Because we feel more comfortable, in this postmodern world, just materially reducing everything into pure matter, right? That there is no God, there is no spiritual realm, there's nothing outside of ourself. All that matters is here and now. When we die, there's nothing. Okay. Now, of course, Hufford's not going to take any explicit issue with that side. He's going to allow people to say that. He's also going to allow the spiritually inclined individuals to make the conclusions they like, right? Because he's even in his approach. But as I said, I'm not. And one of we'll start with the hypotheses, and then we'll get into the explanations as to, because one of the hypotheses will disprove his theory. Okay, so there's two theories about how these events are going to come about. One is the culturally not centered, cultural source hypothesis. Okay, gosh, really working my brain here. So one is the cultural source hypothesis, and the cultural source hypothesis posits, it states that the Old Hag is merely a result of the cultural traditions and elements that were present, and that the culture, the people, basically made it up, or they naturally generated it through their supernatural, paranormal beliefs. And so that's what it is, right? And then in which case that would totally nullify like any possibility for like extraordinary spiritual experiences. And then he's going to pit that against this other hypothesis, which is the experience-centered hypothesis, right? So we have cultural, oh, I just said it. Cultural, not centered. Source. So we have cultural source hypothesis pitted up against the experience-centered hypothesis. Man, these are a lot of words to a lot of unique, odd words to keep in the brain. And we're going to try and pit them against one another, which are true. The experience-centered hypothesis states that the experience is occurring independently and outside of the culture, and that experience is what generates and results in the cultural climate and elements. Okay, so people are experiencing it. They just started having the Old Hag. They were getting hagged by people, and that is what resulted in the surrounding cultural traditions, practices, beliefs, and values. And so ultimately, I mean, big spoiler alert, almost definitively, Hufford does a very good job in, again, being even-handed and trying to argue these out, right? He uses a proverbial, logical, reasonable pry bar to determine that the cultural hypothesis, the cultural source hypothesis is wrong, and that the experience-centered hypothesis is indeed the strongest one. Right? He may not say it's correct. I think he may make an argument for that, but it's correct. So these events are happening outside of it. So we can't just explain away these events by cultural means. Okay. So now how else can we try and explain away this phenomena that we haven't already mentioned? Well, one of them is going to be like psychoanalytical explanations. They're going to try and explain that this was, just based in some kind of psychosexual paradigm, and that, this is like the hyperactive stuff. But the problem with that is that all the literature that was making those claims, 30 years before Hufford was writing, are people who were either contemporaries or neo-Freudian, contemporaries with Freud or neo-Freudian, and they're, again, just reducing everything to sexual drives and motivations. And it doesn't really do justice to it. Are there sometimes events like that? Maybe, right? But that would be more leaning towards succubus, incubus stuff, not sleep paralysis. So we can kind of just discard out of hand a lot of the psychoanalytical theories that surround that. I actually don't know what Carl Jung has said about any of this stuff. I would be interested to see if he wrote anything. I think that Hufford may have mentioned Jung once, but it was probably, he was just saying that Jung only wrote like one thing on it, right? So he didn't touch on anything specifically. Maybe like inadvertently mentioned a report that was very similar to sleep paralysis. And that's part of the trouble too, is that in the literature, if you're going back into older literature about all this stuff, you're going to find things that are sleep paralysis-esque, but if they didn't include enough information, then you're not going to be able to establish the 4 primary characteristics and or any one or more of the secondary criteria. Okay, so that makes it more difficult to do meta-analyses on past literature and old psychoanalytical traditions and reports or case studies. Okay, if anybody has like good examples on that, I would love to see them, because I think that would just be cool. There's only so much that you could do. And remember too, I remind you again that Hufford was writing this book in the 80s. He published in the 80s. He was writing in the 70s and 80s. So there's only so much you could do with old academic systems like that. He had to like go look up everything like by hand, manually, through indexes, through like the Dewey Decimal System. Like, you know, he didn't have Grok. He couldn't just use like an AI supercomputer, like, you know, masquerading as AI, but it's just a really beefed up search engine. He didn't have that. We do. So if you find anything cool, send it my way. Okay, so we can explain it through that means as well. Some people would want to, and this is where like, kind of like there's a stigma around sleep paralysis, where people don't want to talk about it because they think that because of what they experience, it's so jarring, it's so terrifying, it's so traumatic, that they will even do things like go and check the outside of their house, or like clear their whole house to make sure that there are no like dark entities or evil people or anything like that. And so it causes the stigma. They're worried that other people are going to think that they're crazy because it was kind of a little bit of a crazy event. And that's just not the case. Hufford's going to say that there is absolutely no literature present, psychological literature or studies, that have given any credence to the claim that there is a mental illness or lack of mental health associated with experiencing sleep paralysis. Okay, the Old Hag does not make you a crazy person. All right, so let's see. The source of the hag is not found in culture. Therefore, Hufford must continue his search into psychology. Right, so he determines that it's not a cultural result. As of 1982, Hufford could not find the source or mechanism for the hag within any psychological literature. While there has been many first accounts of the event, authors tend to explain away the hag. The easy way to discard any and all phenomena which are similar to the hag is to say that all phenomenal or supernatural events are fully encompassed in the subconscious. The hag is a complex and interesting class of observable events which does not lend itself to any current psychological category. We must continue by learning what the hag is not. Right. So we're gonna the way that we're gonna learn through all this is like through an apophatic system rather than cataphatic. Right. Apophatic descriptions are what isn't the phenomena. Cataphatic is what is the phenomena. So so electroencephalography was invented by Hans Berger in the late 1920s, also called EEG, is used to measure electrical activity in the brain, right? And this is going to allow us to discover and look at REM sleep, rapid eye movements, during the deepest stages of our sleep. And this is basically going to be one of our, like, this is kind of outdated stuff, okay? But this is how Hufford looks at it. So he's looking at these stages of sleep in relationship to trying to find other ways that people are explaining away this event. Now, this is the area in which even modern medicine is going to point to and say, well, this is what's happening. That is all that's happening, okay? And again, refer back to the example that I gave about the splitting of the Red Sea. No, just because we can give a material explanation to a phenomena does not mean that it robs it of its meaning or its spiritual implication. Okay. So these are the stages of sleep. N1 is light sleep. N2 is light sleep, but deeper, more relaxed. N3 is deep sleep or slow wave. And then REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. This is the dream stage, right? And there are about 4 to 6 cycles that occur in a typical night of sleep. All right. And that just happens over and over again. So we go from N1, 2, 3, REM, and then repeat, right? Now, what is occurring that Hufford found is that whenever the sleep paralysis is occurring, that we are in light sleep, right? Either N1 or N2, and then REM just crashes in. We just like crash into REM sleep very abruptly. So where we would usually see a gradual movement into REM, whatever that would look like on a graph, I literally have no idea. So I don't know why I did this movement with my hand. But yeah, so we crash into REM sleep, and that is what is associated with a sleep paralysis. So there's some kind of like dysfunction that's occurring with REM, in which it's just starting very abruptly. And so, kind of if you wanted to theorize that it's like this in-between state, that might be kind of accurate. But this is not, again, just a way for us to explain away these events. It's not sufficient because, I mean, at the very least, it doesn't explain the way that people feel about it and the way that people interpret the events is not commensurate with the material explanation, right? Just the material explanation. And that, I think, is the case with like all dreams. It's like, Peterson has talked a lot about this, about dreams, especially in relationship to children having nightmares and things. And you tell the kid that, it's just a nightmare, go back to sleep. Okay, yeah, well, like that, sure. You can say that as the person not having the nightmare, but when you have chronic nightmares, it's very real. It's very pertinent to you. Like it is, what's the difference between a dream and waking life? And I don't mean to be, what are they called? A surrealist, like all the filmmakers and stuff that are just making surreal things and make the claim that there's no difference between the dream world and reality, right? I think there is a difference, but experientially, I see where they're going with that because it's hard to differentiate in the moment when one is occurring. It seems easier to know what reality is and not a dream, rather than the other way around. The dream sometimes is hard to know what is reality. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to get to, is that when we're in the sleep paralysis, it's an extremely real event. Everything is happening. And it's difficult for us to try and parse these things out, right? So let's give a little bit of like definitions to what night terrors are, and in contrast to sleep paralysis. So a night terror is a spontaneous awakening from in REM, right, sleep. The subject is often, man, my handwriting is really bad. Something experiencing a racing heart. Yeah, so they have a racing heart. They will often dream in extreme fear. They will sometimes even run out of the room they were sleeping in when they wake up from it. Okay, so they may have like, the sweating. They have cold sweats when they wake up. Some overlap with sleep paralysis too. They might have a cold sweat when they wake up. But obviously that is occurring in a state in which the person is not wakeful and they are not, having all of the different primary, secondary features. So it's a night terror happening in a dream. It's completely different. Is not the same as sleep paralysis. And the guy that is going to, finally I find him, the contemporary of Freud that's making a lot of the claims against sleep paralysis and like that, trying to psychoanalyze and psychologically disinterpret the Old Hag, is Ernest Jones. So he was a student of Freud, and he makes all of these arguments about the psychosexuality, right? And So yeah, okay, here's a crazy thing. The common events while supine are explained by the woman's common position during sex. The pressure on her chest is likened to the man being over her. The paralysis caused by her angst and incestual desires, which are being repressed. I mean, that's crazy. That's pretty crazy. So that's what you're going to get out of Ernest Jones, trying to psychologically disinterpret, right, explain away this sleep paralysis event. And he's going to give some wackadoo explanations about why it is that, the woman has such suppressed feelings of incest toward her father, and like her lover is like pressing down on her chest in the missionary position. It's just, I mean, absurd, really. It gives a lot of psychoanalytic people a bad rap, and that's why a lot of the neo-Freudian people are really not to be trusted, right? Now, I've kind of like come into a different light with Jung lately, given a lot of his Gnostic tendencies, more than tendencies. But just to say, the psychoanalysts are really not contributing a whole lot on this subject. They got a lot of good areas that you can learn from them, and this was not one of them. So, yeah, those are several ways that we can try and explain away the event, and they really just don't do anything but just ignore it, right? They're kicking the can down the road for the next person. It's not... it's not fruitful. There's really nothing coming out of it, right? So let's get next into, let's see, what's the next thing? We got culture, psychological phenomenology, the Old Hag in Newfoundland, conclusion. Yeah, so there are a lot of really cool stories that are given in this book. And so if you really wanted to read it and you're not like a big research guy, I would like say you can still purchase the book, but then decide to just go in and read all of the case studies and the interviews, because I mean, they're pretty fun. Like, I don't know if there's like one in particular that would be really great, but they're a little terrifying. I mean, really, and especially if you have experienced these things yourself, it's gonna like shake your boots, right? Because there are some crossings over with these like vanilla Old Hag events and like more paranormal supernatural events, and I think I'm gonna wait to try and like parallel some of those until I do the Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future book. Because I think that they'll mix really well. Now, I kind of posit my theory about what is happening here with sleep paralysis. My theory about what is happening is that there are demonic forces that are utilizing a mechanical opportunity on the victim or the subject in the sleep paralysis, right? I think that there is a mechanical event that it sometimes occurs where the body cannot move, but the eyes can receive visual input. And the demons use that opportunity to wreak havoc upon the person, to harvest their fear, and to otherwise cause confusion and dismay. Right? So there's really not a lot, I mean, I say that, and then there's really not a lot of explanation about a lot of other stuff surrounding this whole event. But that's my idea about it. I come from a Christian worldview that is not, cessationalist. I'm not a cessationalist. I believe that there are demonic forces that are prowling about, looking to devour, destroy us, and that if a person is in possession of the Holy Spirit and is under the care of Christ, they can't hurt us or destroy us, but we do have to contend with them at times due to our proclivity towards sin and the influence that can sometimes, have on us. So that's my idea. I think that this book was a big eye-opener for how the spiritual realm touches with the physical realm. And again, Hufford is not making a claim either way, but if it gives credence to my own position, I guess I'll say it. He went out of his way to not make any overt claims one way or the other about spiritual realms or material reduction in this book. He did that primarily so that he could publish it, get it published, and get it bought up by people so that they would be reading it, right? He wanted to be as even as he could be for two reasons. One, that's just really good research practice in, if you're doing studies and sharing your data with people. And two, he wanted it to be a big seller, and he didn't want to relegate it to some market and get marked as like some kind of like spiritual crazy person, because he had the experience. He didn't tell anybody about that in the book until much later after it had been published. It's still in print, still a popular book. And he admits now in interviews that he, does believe that there is a spiritual realm, that there's something outside of the realm that we can readily see. And so, yeah, if you're a material reductionist, I highly recommend that you read this book and you decide for yourself what you think. If you are a, Christian, evangelical, charismatic, you can read the book and get a better sense of what a more balanced viewpoint of the meeting between the spiritual and the material really is. So hopefully you guys enjoyed all this. I'm sure I missed a lot of different stuff, but we've gone over an hour now, so I'm going to call it quits. Again, here is a link to the video that I have on all of my sleep paralysis, Old Hag experiences, just me talking about them and relaying them. And I hope you guys enjoy. If you guys have any experiences with sleep paralysis, the Old Hag, anything like that, feel free to tell your stories in the comments below, and I will reply to them and say what I think. So thank you guys. I'll see you later.